Hello.
Hey.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say I'm talking to you, Greg.
How
are
are
you?
I'm just here.
It's been so long.
It's been-
Even though I've been at your house for 30 minutes already.
Yeah.
It's been so long. Hello,
So
everyone
long.
who's listening.
Hey.
I've looked into the deepness of my brain to try to figure out how many like regular active listeners we have. I'm guessing probably about 50.
That's nice.
In a lot of our more popular videos, podcast episodes get around like 130, sometimes up to 200 if it's particular. Like Magic Items is a really popular one.
Yeah.
Creation Myths is another popular one, which I would like to revisit at some point because it was really like, it's Creation Myths. No, it's just one. It's just mine. That's it. That's what we talk about. In any case, so approximately all 50 of you who listen actively, hello. How are you? We're back.
We're back. We've got the window open because it's beautiful outside.
It's so pretty outside. Well, okay, it's bright.
It's bright. Yeah.
But I like the draft that it brings,
Mm-hmm.
and it really brightens up an otherwise dark place.
Yeah, it's not too hot yet, so we're not at the point where we blast the AC and then turn it off right before we start recording.
Right.
We're not there yet.
But if there's a random like honking or something, we'll probably edit it out. I don't know. We'll find out.
You're gonna hear a little chatter, a little bit of a ASMR from the sidewalk outside. So
I think it'll bring some atmosphere. Here.
Mm-hmm.
If we were at my place recording, it would be sirens about every 15 minutes.
Sirens, yeah.
And it doesn't help that it's because I have 2 hospitals relatively near me, and I live where I live. So like where I live is not fantastic. It could be worse. I don't live in North, so that's important.
Yeah. But anyway, this is probably going to be a shorter episode. Today we're talking about an idea that I have for a piece of history in my imperial culture, something that will give some context to things that that are going on in the setting, and it's something where like I like the idea of, for at least one place having like a pretty concrete timeline of events that sound like they actually would have happened, right? Where it's not like
not everything is extraordinary.
Yeah, where it's not like, oh, this was a crazy magical war that happened here, and then all the dragons came, and then there was, like, we're not Forgotten Realms, and then there was, I don't even remember what's called, the Spell Plague or something like that. I don't know.
Right.
And then the entire cosmos reordered itself because we went from 3rd edition to 4th edition.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Now this is much more mundane.
Much more mundane. But I think that I would find that compelling. It would make the place feel lived in and real.
Especially if you had some like fun names for things that used to be this way and now are no longer.
Yeah. And I think that particularly that this will inspire factions, which I think will be fun.
Right, like relatively non-military factions.
Yeah.
Right. So Greg, what is this idea that you've got?
The idea is that I was inspired by a couple moments in history, in the broad sense of moments, when
moments being decades of social movement.
Yeah. When there was like changes in how, like, basically changes in like the economies of places, and how that was also like affected the culture and like the social narratives of like the particular place. And so I was, at first I was thinking about like the narrative that you get like after like around like communism is something where like, oh, now we have an industrial society and people are being exploited. There's a lot of resentment from that, and there is kind of like this, there's a grassroots movement and an intellectual movement that has like a lot of that like it wants to be violent, but then like I was kind of like that wants to be violent, wants to affect change, has all these theories about how the world works, and I was like, oh, that's really cool, that's really interesting. But I'm not putting communism in my fantasy setting. Like, no, like that's not gonna that's Like that would take me out of it.
Yeah, that reminds me of the scene in Monty Python in the Quest for the Holy Grail when King Arthur is
Right.
like going up to the thing. He's like, "My name is Arthur, King of the Britons." He's like, "You're a king? Who elected you king?" It's like, "I was not elected. I was given the sword Excalibur by the Lady of the Lake." "You mean a watery tart threw a sword at you and that made you king?"
Yeah,
He's
no.
like, supreme executive power, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
So no anarcho-syndicalist communes in your
No.
campaign
But I was
setting.
thinking about like what's something similar, like what's something that is kind of close to that I could also have that put narratives into a society, and like that was the thing that I was really interested in. I
Mhm.
wanted the idea of like there being like particular sentiments.
Mhm.
And so I was like, oh, well, let's just roll back a little bit farther. And then we can think about like the transition to industrialization and the situation, like the basically like I'm painting in broad strokes here, but
Mhm.
in Europe, like in the transition to an industrial society, guilds basically went by the wayside. They ended up losing their political power, and
Yeah.
I assume most of them ended up dissolving. And that's that's where like Freemasons come from. Like they were like an actual guild, right? So not all of them went away, but that was something that
I had no idea of that.
wow,
But it makes sense, I guess.
yeah, right. Of course, it's like, oh yeah, of course.
Do you think they worked on buildings?
And they were called Freemasons because they were like independent. Like the idea was that it was like they were like Masons by Masons for Masons, right? That's my
Oh,
understanding.
wow.
But I really liked the idea of there being a narrative. So that whether or not this is true doesn't matter. That's just what people believe, and that people have been listening to us for a long time. They know that I am a fan of this. It doesn't, what's actually true doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Just what people think is what matters.
Right.
So I like the idea that in my imperial culture, in maybe a decade ago, maybe 2 decades ago, there was kind of like a guild busting political movement that happened, and this was probably spurred on by like the growing industrialization of the society, which meant that guilds no longer had political power, which meant that they could be eradicated, basically. Like they lost their power because they no longer really controlled like production anymore. That had gone to wealthy merchants, that had gone to industrialists in like the traditional sense, and then they no longer had the political strength to stick around, and so they were then taken apart by the other special interests in political politics that involved at that time. And like I don't know if that was done in like a kind of like congressional sort of sense, or if it was done by executive decree or what, but they went away.
Or by torch and pitchfork.
Or something grassroots, which would, in some places, I think that would probably be fun to do.
Yeah.
Like in some places it was a grassroots
And I feel like
thing.
it would be probably torch and pitchforks to start, and then as people, neighboring areas realize that that's what was coming if they didn't get ahead of it, then it would go to more, congressional and executive actions. So super quick question, right?
Yeah.
If this is happening and you're talking about an industrialized like economic situation, what kind of historical time are you looking at for a setting in which this would be? Because in order to be industrialized, you need to have like standard, relatively mass-produced manufacturing practices.
So this is it's really pre-industrial.
Okay.
And so I'm thinking like water wheels, and before there were like honest to God factories, one thing that you would have happen is that people would, like artisans would make goods at their home, like they'd make a component of a good at their home, and then someone would come through and like pick up those components and they'd be assembled at another place.
Oh, okay, I see. So the assembly line is just different pit stops all over the town.
Yeah, but like those would still have to be like hand fitted
Right.
somewhat, but you're kind of like in this. I'm thinking it's like this transitionary period between like real industrialization, like interchangeable parts. Like you're not really there yet. And I want that. I want to do that because like that matches with a lot of the other technology. Like it's match locks and wheel locks.
Mhm.
You know, like I don't want this to feel like American Revolution. I want
Mhm.
this to feel like
Age of Sail kind of.
Age of Sail. Yeah. Yep.
I gotcha.
Like early
Sir
Age
Francis
of Sail.
Drake era, I would say.
I don't know who that
So
is, but sure.
he was the guy who kicked off kicking the snot out of the Spaniards by taking all their gold.
I still want there to be. I don't want oars to have completely gone away. In
Right.
some places, like especially like
Well,
I
especially
definitely
if you're sailing against the wind
Yeah.
or with no wind.
but I I think it's called galleys,
Yeah.
where they've got oarsmen, they've also got sails like
Mhm.
that. Because
So late 1500s is Sir
Mhm.
Francis Drake.
yeah, that sounds about right.
Yep.
But then culturally, probably a little bit farther along in some places and not as
Mhm.
far along in others, right? And so the narrative that is in society is that guild workers and artisans have monopolized, basically like on goods.
Mhm.
They're the only ones who are allowed to make it legally, which is something that is true within the medieval period. Is that guilds would basically they would be like
They'd lobby for laws.
right that like they're a special interest group, right?
Yeah.
And they had basically they'd say like we're the only people that can make a thing in a particular area. And so there's this people are like they feel like they've been taken advantage of by
Mhm.
these people, like that they're the only ones that can make it, and that the knowledge and secrets that they have need to be revealed to the public, not
Mhm.
kept secret. And that basically there's like this idea that they're greedy and they're screwing you over, right?
Right.
And whether or not that's true, that's irrelevant. That's what people
Mhm.
believe. And so there was a period of time, probably like a generation ago in the
Mhm.
setting when a lot of political action was done to remove their power.
Mhm.
And they're still going to feel the fallout of that 20 years later. And so a lot there, you're going to come across memorabilia
Mhm.
or old buildings like, oh, this used to be a guild hall and now
Mhm.
it's something else. But some of these factions are still going to be around, like the Freemasons, right? Like
Mhm.
they're just now existing in a different form. Now they're a
Mhm.
fraternity or they're a secret society of some kind.
Right.
And like that's the thing that I would think would be really cool. It's like the political interests of a particular faction didn't actually go away.
Mhm.
Now they just exist in a different form, right? And
Mhm.
so that's something that I would find really interesting. And this is very much like a detail thing, right? It's something
Mhm.
where like, oh, what's this knickknack that's here? Like, oh, it's a signet ring of a Freemason guild.
Mhm.
Like this person used to be in one of those guilds before they were dismantled. Maybe he's a little bit sour about it, right?
Right. And that would add a lot of flavor to your NPCs.
Because
That where it's like, yeah, this guy is a grumpy old man. Well, why is he grumpy? Well, he could probably be grumpy for this reason.
and yeah, now like artisans in that society are going to feel like they've lost they've lost status. Like they no longer
Mhm.
feel like they have like political power,
Mhm.
and they likely feel like they've been quite mistreated, and it's not like the
Right.
good old days.
Yeah.
And all of those like all of those people that like migrated from the farms to the city
Mhm.
and demanded to make low quality product using the techniques that we'd mastered. Like they're the
Mhm.
ones that got
Do
me
I
out
get
of this
nothing
job.
for inventing these,
For
manufacturing
carrying
processes?
for carrying on this legacy
Right.
of creating these things, right? Like so that would be interesting, and that would be like a fun like old fight, like old
Mhm.
conflict. And it's something where I think that's cool because you can have just like, oh, this is a thing that happened in society. You can put it on a timeline, and it's not like, and this is when all the demons came out of the
Mhm.
ground and tried to
Yeah.
kill everybody. It's like, no, like this is the society changing and advancing.
Mhm.
And
I think,
Yeah.
and obviously my brain goes immediately to taverns, but like naming other buildings too, like you got Can Wonderland out in St. Paul, Minnesota that I know of. It's an old canning facility, turned into a mini golf course.
mm-hmm.
And it's called Can because it's a, can it's an old can factory.
Yeah.
And so maybe the
Oh
maybe
yeah,
the players,
there's an old Guildhall was turned into a tavern or an
yeah.
inn,
I'm thinking to
and
be
that's
like
where
the
all
Drinkers Hall
yeah,
or
and
like the
that-
Drinkers Guild or something like that.
but like that's where all of the all the artisans go who are like upset about what's happened to
yeah,
them,
and you got to have one of your rings or something.
Mhm. And it would be a place where maybe they're not trying to do things that will like bring the guilds back, but they're trying to do
Mhm.
like if you're like looking for people who would be like willing to sabotage
Mhm.
a factory or something like that, then you're like, oh, let's go there. There's
Yeah.
people that probably would do it because they actually hate that shit.
Mhm.
This is an aside, but talking about kind of like industrialization and stuff like that. In Rome, there were effectively bread factories,
Okay.
like in like classic, like in the Roman Empire,
Yep.
where there'd be like machines that would. I think they were powered by water or by treadmills. I'm not sure which.
Okay.
Or, but they would like grind and like knead flour and that
Mhm.
sort of thing. And so if you were living in Rome, you wouldn't be baking bread. Like you wouldn't be likely that you'd be baking bread in your home.
Mm-hmm.
You'd be
You
buying
would go
bread.
to the
You'd be buying bread that was effectively mass produced.
right.
And so that's something where I think there's going to be some industries that really have moved on to like a pretty industrial situation. And I think
Mhm.
like bread is probably one
or
that I would have.
proto-industrial.
Proto-industrial, while there's others that aren't going to be there yet. So like it's likely that like armor making and like it probably would be a lot of like weapons stuff. It's
Mhm.
something that probably is still not industrial yet. It's probably
Right.
and there may be guilds that are holding out like, oh, what if the guilds that do arms and armor, like those are still around,
Mhm.
and like those had enough political clout to not be taken apart.
Right.
And that might be interesting.
Maybe maybe part of the reason is like a town feels it necessary to document like registering firearms. So it's like
Mhm.
you need to make sure that not everyone in this freaking place gets a sword
right,
or a weapon of
it's
some
like
sort.
not everyone can know how to make these things, so we must
because
be
it'd
kept
be really
secret.
dangerous, or like a Greek fire, something
Mhm.
similar. It's like that secret was lost to time, or Roman concrete, like those were lost to time. And maybe in your setting, it's because the guild held on to the secret, and eventually the guild will,
Go under.
go under and burn the secret or
Mhm.
something like that. But yeah, maybe your armor's guild is still around because it's important to make high quality arms and armor, and
Mhm.
flooding the market with subpar quality stuff just won't do.
Yeah, and in reality, it was like that particular political lobby was just strong
Mhm.
enough to not, to be able to create a narrative that justified their existence.
Their propaganda machine was much better than the rest.
But that might be interesting. Now, in my setting, you've got the imperial like nation culture, and then you've
Mhm.
got a lot of vassal states. So
Okay.
so countries that have pledged their allegiance to the empire, because if they don't, they're going to get
Yeah.
stomped. And those most
You
of
will
those,
accept our freedom, or we will force it upon you.
yeah, yep, and most of them are in a much more like medieval state. Not all of them.
Okay.
Like they're definitely like being there is absolutely an effort to assimilate them culturally,
Mhm.
which the political elites of a lot of those countries are very concerned about.
Right.
So one of the things that like a king sends his son off to like the imperial school of politics to
Mhm.
like learn basically to like learn about what it's like over there, that
Mhm.
kind of thing, and he comes back and then now is like talking about like fucking legislatures and shit. Like
Mhm.
that's something that would that would be like a concern. Like
Yeah.
there'd absolutely be a tension of like, if we like send our kids over there, like they're going to come back and they're probably going to be more sympathetic to those ideas, which is a
Right.
problem because things should be the
gonna
way they
lose
are.
our culture, and we're
Yeah.
gonna lose our independence.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And there very much would be like, oh yeah, like you can do a thing, like if you let us have an advisor in your court,
Mhm.
then we will let you have this particular thing, or like
Right.
that kind, or we'll
And
give
then
you this
advisor
particular
is-
freedom, right?
Yeah. He's
that-
like 1 part advisor, 2 part spy.
Right, exactly. And some of those advisors would be explicitly spies, where it's like, we are going to send you we're going to send you a spy master.
Mhm.
Like, so you can, because we know that our vassal states quarrel, and we know that you are on the border of our empire, and so we're going to send you a spy master for, like, so you can,
So that you can
So-
use him
for
for
your
what you want.
for
to
what
use
you
him
want. But
for.
then he shows up and you're like, okay, obviously this person doesn't have my best interests in
Yeah.
mind.
He has my best interests in line, as long as my best interests are the Empire's
Right,
best interests.
Right, but that's kind of how I imagine they really do their influencing. Is that
Mm-hmm.
it's soft but insidious.
Right.
Uh,
Not here's an army, use it how you will,
Mhm.
but use it how I want you to use it. Otherwise, it's my army.
yeah, and those places would likely still, many of them would likely still have guilds, and so
Mhm.
that would be an interesting cultural shift, where it's like,
Mhm.
someone that came from those places comes in, and then like suddenly like artisans are kind of like are vilified by a lot of people, and it's like,
Mhm.
what? Like, no, this was like the middle class before, right?
Yeah.
Was like being in a guild, essentially. And so they would probably be like, they'd probably be very confused, and
I
while those
wonder-
artisans probably are still like, they're not destitute, like they're still
Mhm.
like making money, but there's no longer the social esteem of being a
Right.
master.
So I imagine a like political, I don't know, like the elites of society from like within the empire would probably like go to these outer vassal states and not mind the artisans still being there. Like, it might be a culture shock, but it's like, if you're one of the elite, you have money, you can insert yourself into kind of the political sphere. That puts you like in the good graces of these artisans,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're it's probably better for you, because then, you're not subject to the economic will of the people. You're subject to the economic will of, the artisans who, you can be buddy with and have really fancy dinners and buy fancy clothes.
There's less people to wine and dine.
Yeah.
Or you already know those people is really what it is.
You
'Cause
know where to go to find the person who will get you the best deal on the ring,
Mhm.
instead of having to go to the people's shop in order to find different kinds of jewelry or whatever.
Mhm. Yeah, so that's kind of what I'm thinking. I just figured that would be an interesting way to add
Mhm.
some flavor to the setting. Where this, I just think that I would be interested to see the players being surprised, like the first time I kind of like point out like there's this anti-artisan sentiment. They would
Mhm.
probably, I just think that would be interesting, because they'd be like, oh wait, this is a little bit different. This is
Mhm.
it's kind of its own place, and I think that would, I would be excited by that.
So I'm thinking about this now too, just to continue riffing at least for a moment. Would there be a movement of workers to places where the guild system has broken down, where it's like, oh hey, I hear over in Albertville or whatever, they don't have artisans anymore, and it's a much more open job market, and so there are people kind of like flooding in, looking for jobs, and then everyone else is just like, yo, F this, we're gonna scoot.
Yeah, I think it would be both ways, where it would, there very much, I do want to have a sense of like, there is now money in urban areas,
Mhm.
where there's a, like, I want this idea of that, like, there is migration coming from
Mhm.
the rural areas to the city.
So even before the players get there, they might encounter a band of workers
Mhm.
moving to the city
But-
for work.
Yeah, but then there may be people moving out
Mhm.
of there because they're like, oh, like, someone may be like, hey, I actually put the work in, and I am a master, or like, I am a
Mhm.
journeyman, so I'm gonna move out of our imperial culture to a place where they actually will respect my journeyman status,
Yeah.
and I will be paid what I'm worth, right?
Mhm.
And so that would be interesting.
Yeah. I think that'd be cool.
Yeah.
And it just gives you like an example of an extra way to flavor NPCs and why they might be disgruntled or hopeful or whatever.
Mhm.
Cool.
Well,
Well,
yeah,
that's all I've got.
that's all I've got. So
It's a shorter episode for sure.
that's fine.
But I'm here for it. In any case, send us emails. We love emails.
We do love emails. review us on whatever platform you got.
I'm not a huge like, let's review us, but then I was looking at these different podcast websites, right? And I'm like, usually we're on page 1 somewhere.
Yeah.
And I don't think that people really look for tabletop role-playing game world-building podcasts very often. So if you're one of the audience, congrats, you are a very select few with a wonderful taste, and we want to know what you think by using a rating of approximately 1 to 5 stars and a string of words that totals no more than 500 characters or whatever the limit is. So that and emails, and that's all I've got.
All right,
sweet. This has been a bite-sized Lore Foundry.
Wow.
Enjoy the rest of whatever day today happens to be.